So hello everyone, my name is Taryn Abner, and I work for the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health as their outreach coordinator. At the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health, we envision access to comprehensive sexual education and health for adolescents through Alabama and advance our mission to champion healthy adolescent development through medically accurate, equitable sexual health and services. Every month we do a monthly webinar where we have different speakers come in and talk on various subjects. So this month we have Reverend Angela, and I'll allow you to introduce yourself so we can get started.
Thank you, Taryn. It is good to be with all of you today. I am going to start sharing my screen so we can get started. Can everyone see it? No. Can you see it? You can. Great. The thing is, I can't see it. There we go. Now I can
see it. You're good. It works.
Awesome. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend Angela Tyler Williams. My pronouns are she and her, and I am proud to serve as the co-executive director for movement building at Sacred, the spiritual alliance of communities for reproductive dignity. Today, we are going to be talking about telling the truth, faith-rooted support for reproductive justice. And as I tell you a little bit more about myself, I would love to hear a little bit more about who is in the room. Who are you? If you'll share your name, your pronouns, your location, and something that you are excited to learn about today. Give a moment to drop those in the chat. And as we do that, I will share a little bit more about myself. As I said, my pronouns are she and her. I'm Angela Williams. I am a pastor ordained in the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. And I got ordained into this work and ministry of talking about faith-based support for reproductive health, rights, and justice, and LGBTQIA plus equality. I'm coming to you today from my home in Washington, D.C., which is on unceded Nacotchtank and Piscataway lands. And it's good to see those of you coming. Some of you I know from other places of sacred work. Some of you are coming in because of your connection to the Alabama campaign. And it's good to be with all of you. I want to start by telling you a little bit about who Sacred is and what we do. So Sacred, the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity, is an alliance of religious leaders, congregations, movement organizations, activists, and academics collaborating to advance reproductive justice through congregational education, culture change, community building, and direct service. Our vision is that in a sacred world, religious communities shift the culture to make reproductive justice a lived reality. And our mission is to create and equip a network of spiritual communities with liberative religious education and practices that shift our culture to advance reproductive justice. We proudly affirm bodily autonomy and moral agency, celebrate healthy sexuality, and advocate for reproductive dignity to support the flourishing of all people and families. So what is reproductive justice? We are really rooting ourselves in that, so it's important to be clear about what framework we're operating from. Reproductive justice is a broad intersectional framework that was developed by the 12 founding mothers that you see on the right hand of your screen who came together in Chicago in 1994. We are celebrating the 30th anniversary of reproductive justice just last month is when that happened. And they came together and said, we need something a little bit more than what was dominating as sort of a white feminist framework of second wave feminism that focused a lot on choice, but didn't really address access or the real lived concerns, primarily of women of color. So it's a concept created by women of color, in particular Black and Indigenous women, and it combines the frameworks of reproductive rights, social justice, and human rights, and views it all through the lens of Black feminism. Right. And the definition of reproductive justice is that there are 4 tenets: the human right to maintain personal body autonomy, the human right to have children, the human right not to have children, and the human right to raise the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. So as we sort of talk through this, you'll see these tenets sort of coming up over and over again. And I want to be clear that abortion access or reproductive justice is not a euphemism for abortion. So when we're talking about abortion-specific things, we need to make sure we're using that language. When we're talking about this broad intersectional framework that really centers the needs of people and women of color, then we can use that reproductive justice language. So I want to dig right in. We've got a lot of content to cover together today, and it's good to see everyone coming in from all over the country. Hello, glad to see you here. So what is it that we're going to be talking about today? The one thing is we're telling the truth, and the truth is that knowledge is power. I'm going to talk about this from really an abortion-specific, reproductive justice-focused perspective, but these are all, I think you can see and apply these to sex education and the need for comprehensive sex education. We're going to talk about the history of faith and reproductive freedom, and we're going to talk about how to talk about faith and abortion in your own context, and then I'll close with some time for questions and responses. That sound great? Great. I'm going to move us right on in. So what do you know coming into this? What do you know about the history of abortion and contraception, and particularly how this connects to a theological, religious understanding of things? So we're going to start with a poll. I'm going to invite you to add your answers into the chat using 1, 2, 3, or 4. When did the concept of life begins at conception originate? Is it 1, in the Bible? 2, is it the mid-1500s? 3, the mid-1800s? Or 4, 1973? All right, we've got some folks saying 1973. One person saying 2, one person says 3. All right, so those of you who said 3, you are correct. The concept life begins at conception is not in the Bible. It did not develop during the Protestant Reformation, which is sort of that mid-1500s period. It did not rise in 1973 when Roe v. Wade became the law of the land. It is from the mid-1800s and is a concept developed by Dr. Horatio Storer, who is a medical doctor, not a theologian, not a pastor or a priest. He's a medical doctor. And so in 1847, the American Medical Association was formed. Up until then, for the whole time of time immemorial, is primarily women and people who can become pregnant who are in charge of fertility, of child rearing, of childbearing. Fertility is seen as women's work, and men are not really a part of it. But when the American Medical Association was formed, it was leading to a professionalization of physicians. And so they pushed midwives, women, out of the reproductive story after thousands and thousands of years of that really being the place where women had power and agency. And so this concept, life begins at conception, started medically, and then after the fact was sort of reverse engineered to be justified legally and theologically. So let's fast forward a little bit. And I neglected to say this at the top, but I'll mention it now. We're really going to focus a lot on Christianity. In this context, I'm going to draw on a couple of other different traditions, but we're having a U.S. specific focus for this presentation. And as we know, there's a lot of Christianity and the weaponization of Christianity that has been used to put into place abortion bans, anti-women laws, anti-sex, anti-sex education. All of these bills come from a particular religious understanding. So I'm going to walk us through how we got to where we are and the ways that religion and politics are all tied up into that. So let's fast forward. We are now in 1965, and birth control is ruled a private matter. It is within doctor and patient control. So there are some positives and there are some drawbacks to that. It's helpful to get a win of this is a privacy concern, therefore you should not be able to legislate that. However, privacy is not the solid ground that we have, as we've seen with the overturning of Roe v. Wade on that sort of privacy argument from a legal perspective. So in 1967, there was a pastor named Reverend Howard Moody. How many of you, if you can give a reaction, raise your hand or some sort of emoji reaction, have you heard of the clergy consultation service on abortion? I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking no. I got a couple of thumbs up from at least a couple of folks who are familiar with Sacred's work. So we are going to go into this. So I just said in 1965, birth control is deemed a private matter. In 1967, Reverend Howard Moody is a Protestant pastor in New York City, and he has a woman in his congregation come to him who is like, I'm pregnant and I don't want to be. What can I do? How can you help me to get an abortion? And he looks around and he's like, I actually don't know that information. I don't know where to find that. And so he gathers up a couple of folks in New York City, and they are like, oh, this is an issue. People are coming to us with these concerns. We need to meet the needs of those in our flock. We need to learn more information about this. And so they developed the clergy consultation service on abortion that is launched with 20 Protestant and Jewish clergy. They took out a big ad in the New York Times saying, we will help you find the abortion care that you need. That network, 1967, again, abortion is not illegal across the United States. This is pre-Roe v. Wade. It becomes a network of 1,400 Protestant, Jewish, and dissident Catholic clergy who help women to access safe and illegal abortions sometimes. This group is the predecessor to the organization Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And so they are active from 1967 to 1973. And so in 1973, you might remember that is when Roe v. Wade becomes the law of the land. And at this same moment, there's a pastor named W.A. Criswell, who's at First Baptist Church of Dallas. Those of you in Texas, those of you near Dallas, know the prominence of this church. W.A. Criswell is a very prominent name in evangelical Christian circles. And I'm going to invite someone to come off mute and read this quote that W.A. Criswell said in 1973.
I will.
Thanks, Monica.
I have always felt that it was only after a child was born and had a life separate from its mother that it became an individual person. And it has always, therefore, seemed to me that what is best for the mother and for the future should be allowed.
Thank you. So how many of you, this is surprising to hear a Baptist pastor say something like this? So how did we get from this very prominent Baptist pastor indicating that it is after a child is born and has a life separate from its mother that it's an individual person, from this sort of mid-1850s, life begins at conception? Like, how did we get here? And how does that then shape the next 40, 50 years of both religious thought and political policy? So we need to go to another important court case, Bob Jones University v. United States. This was in 1976. So at the same time that all of this is happening, you have the civil rights movement and ending segregation, integrating things, in particular, integrating public schools. Now, Bob Jones University is a private conservative Christian college in my home state of South Carolina, and they did not want to enroll or admit Black students. And as a part of the civil rights movement, they were pressuring organizations that would not integrate. They would lose their tax-exempt status for refusing to integrate. And so these history of anti-abortion things really have their roots in white supremacy and in racism. So Bob Jones University went as far as it could, did lose its tax-exempt status for refusing to integrate for a while. And so after that, the religious right starts to coalesce and build more political power. So now we are up to 1978, and this is Ed Dobson, the founder of the Moral Majority, which is a very prominent organization that used Christianity to develop right-wing Republican power in this country. Can I get someone to read this quote?
I can.
Thank you.
The religious new right did not start because of a concern about abortion. I sat in the non-smoke-filled back room with the moral majority, and I frankly do not remember abortion ever being mentioned as a reason why we ought to do something.
Thank you so much. So as they're developing this, abortion is not on their radar. This is 5 years after Roe v. Wade, and where abortion became legal all across the country. And so how did this happen? Let's review this timeline. So back in 1847, American Medical Association is formed, and that's the development of the concept, life begins at conception. 1967, clergy consultation services. There are Christian and Jewish and dissident Catholic clergy who are working together to get folks the care that they need in their communities, helping them to travel if they needed, whether that was to another state or to a different country, Mexico, the UK, Canada, something like that. In 1973 is when we have Roe v. Wade. Abortion is legal all across the land, but we also have these prominent evangelical Christian leaders making a clear distinction that life begins at birth, not at conception. And so as all these shifts are happening, and as we're seeing segregationists, racists, white supremacists losing power, they are starting to figure out what are other ways that we can get more power? How can we get more control back in our society? So 1978, Ed Dobson says abortion wasn't a part of this development, but that is when Jerry Falwell gives his first anti-abortion speech. And so what happens is it's not until 1980 that the Southern Baptist Convention actually puts in place anti-abortion policies. Up until then, they said this is a matter that's up to, they use the language, the mother, the woman, and her doctor and her family, but this is not for the government to have a say in. So what happened is they used lots of different techniques and wedge issues. They tried with pornography. They tried with prayer in schools. They tried with contraception, and those just weren't grabby enough. And they eventually latched onto abortion being this issue that they coalesced around. And the moral majority and the religious right is a part of why Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election in this massive landslide, because evangelical right-wing Christians co-opted Christianity and used it as a tool to consolidate power in the Republican Party. And so all of that, we're now, you know, so all of that is, it's been a 42-year battle for that group of people to say abortion is bad and sex is bad. And how can we do that? We can remove sex education and say you can only focus on abstinence only education, and we only talk about STIs, and we don't actually give you the full information about contraception, about your body, about pleasure, about healthy relationships, about anything involving queer people. And if we can take away that knowledge, then we can take away that power that you have to determine your own life, to determine your own future, to determine the families that you create, how and when and why. And that is how we've gotten to where we are. And it's happened little by little by little until the Dobbs decision that came down in 2022, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. And that's when we had enough judges on the Supreme Court who would vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. So now we are 2 years out from that decision, seeing both the devastating consequences of that. Those of you who are in places like Alabama and Texas, you know this very intimately, of how challenging it is to access the care that you need, and the way that these attacks continue in the public education system. Continuing to chip away at your access to sex ed, your access to history, the way we teach science in schools, to try to continue that legacy for another generation. But at the same time, that's not the full story. You know, we still have that legacy of the clergy consultation services, and folks who have been active on this for a long time. I know there are some of my Unitarian Universalist siblings on this call who have been very active and very loud for decades, advocating for better sex ed, creating the Our Whole Lives sex ed curriculum in partnership with the United Church of Christ, a Christian denomination, and working on something like WISE, of getting sex education into more public spaces as well as schools. If you can't get it in schools, let's make a way that you can get it in an educational setting or in after-school programming, stuff like that. So we have started to tell some of the truth. And I want to pause for a moment here and get some like initial reactions. Is this brand new information for you? Have you known about some of this? Is it shocking and you can't believe it? I invite you can come off mute. You can drop your things in the chat. Are there any particular questions or clarifications that you have?
Hey, Angela, this is great information. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Barbara.
Okay. There was an NPR story I listened to probably 2 years ago that was, to me, and I forget who it was. It was NPR because I feel like they're a pretty good share of news. But the person they were interviewing was talking about how when Reagan ran against Jimmy Carter, the first time, and that guess was that 76 or 80, that the Republican agenda was not at all about abortion. In fact, the Republicans were like, yeah, abortion's fine, it's not an issue. And then how it became one later, and kind of how when I guess Jimmy Carter said he had thoughts of other women or something, it became a religion thing. So I was just curious kind of what happened, if you know, between that 76 and 80 time frame.
Yeah, so that's this latter half of the timeline, just folks realizing that they were going to lose on segregation. Racism was no longer a winning issue. The country was changing, and it became just sort of trying out these different issues, and enough people got on board with abortion being an enemy issue. I'll also name that it's quite convenient to fight on behalf of, quote, the unborn, when you have a group of people who literally do not have voices and do not have a way to advocate for themselves, or to, I don't know how that happened, to advocate for themselves, or to have their own voice and name what their own interests are. It's very convenient for politically and in messaging to champion this group, this literally voiceless group, for your political aims, who cannot share their own side of the story. I see some of folks are familiar with Sacred's work. Some of this is new. some of you have read our board member, Rebecca Todd Peters' Trust Women book, which is a progressive Christian argument for reproductive justice. Yes, so it's important to identify clearly that it does have these white supremacist roots. We cannot remove that. But how they really won, I'll say, is that mainline and progressive Christians just gave up the political sphere and the public space and just stopped talking about it. And so when I'll include myself, the Presbyterian Church is one of the mainline denominations. When we stopped talking about it and said, oh, this is too divisive, it just ceded all of that ground. And so it is important for all of us to talk about it some more. So I'm going to shift us to the second half of this presentation, where we are going to talk about how to talk about faith and abortion, given what we now know. And I'll also name that some of this has changed, particularly in the past 2 years. When I was doing this work pre-2022, it was really hard for me to get clergy and to get faith leaders. They would say, oh yeah, I agree with this, but I can't bring that up with my congregation. This is like a third rail issue. We can't talk about this. We can barely talk about sex. We can barely talk about LGBTQ inclusion. How am I supposed to address this? And now, since I think folks have woken up to the fall of Roe v. Wade and we've all realized abortion is actually really popular. Every time that abortion has been on the ballot in any state, it is the vote, no matter how it's worded. Sometimes it's like for more abortion access or it's against abortion bans. Every time people are voting in favor of increased abortion access. And I would argue that that goes, we could trace that down to increased access to sex education, increased access to contraception, increased access to in vitro fertilization. That is what the people actually want. But where we're running into issues is where our politicians are not representing the actual interests and the views of their constituents. So what is one way that we can work on that? Was one way that we are shifting that culture is learning how to talk about it more. So here at Sacred, we are trying to create a world where everyone is free to make the best decisions that lead to a flourishing life for them and for their families. And so that's where we're coming from. And that's what we're really rooting ourselves in, these values. No matter who you're talking to, no matter what you're talking about, if you root yourself in your values, it is helpful to find that common ground. We can agree that we want folks to make the decisions that are best for them and their families. What I want you to know today is that you have everything you need to participate in this conversation around abortion and faith and sex and sexuality. And there are some key facts. People of every single faith and people who have no particular faith tradition have abortions. And a majority of people across religious traditions support access to legal abortion in all or most cases. If you keep reminding yourself of these particular facts, you have what it takes to have this conversation with anyone in your network. So who is it that actually support abortions? With the exception of white evangelical Protestants, which is not particularly surprising, white mainline Protestants, Black Protestants, Catholic individuals, Catholic people, the Catholic Church might not, but Catholic people have a majority of people who support access to abortion. And the largest one is the unaffiliated. This particular chart doesn't include things like UUs, Jews, Buddhists, who are always sort of very high up in that sort of 83%, 60 to 80%. Yes, we've been doing some research with some partners, Medica, and Hindus are really, really strong in their support for abortion. I don't have the exact numbers with me, and the data isn't fully public yet, but it was really fascinating to get that information, that it is this small minority with a very particular understanding of Christianity that is against this. And so who are the people who are having abortions? 75% are poor or have low income. 62% of abortion patients are religiously affiliated. So people are getting access to this care, are having abortions, whether or not the church says, whether or not their religious leader tells them, because they know what's best for them, their lives, and their families. 59% of people who have abortions already have a child. They're already parents. They're already caring for someone. And for whatever reason, they're not going to care for another child at this time. People across age, race demographics are having abortions. White, Black, Latinx, Hispanic, Asian and Pacific Islander, mixed race, unidentified. Everyone is accessing abortion care as they need it. 60% are in their 20s. Only 12% are in their teens, which might be a surprising bit, because I think there's tropes and stories of all sorts of teen pregnancies, but only 12% of people who have abortions are in their teens. And only 4% are minors. So these are a while back, but Guttmacher Institute is a really great place to find both state-based and some of these abortion-specific things. 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their reproductive life, so by the age of 45. And that does not include trans and non-binary folks in that particular statistic. 17% of abortion patients in 2014 identified themselves as mainline Protestant, 13% as evangelical Protestant, and 24% as Catholic. 38% reported no religious affiliation, and 8% reported another religious affiliation. And 51% of abortion patients said that they were using a contraceptive method in the month that they became pregnant, most commonly condoms or short-acting hormonal method. So this is why it's important both to ensure abortion access and to ensure that we have comprehensive sex education for everyone. Because even if everyone has all the information and is able to access all the kinds of contraceptive methods they want to, that doesn't prevent the need for abortion care. That does not mean that they are going to be perfectly, they're going to work all the time, every single time. And other times there are times that folks need to terminate a pregnancy, even of a wanted pregnancy. And so we need to ensure that abortion access is a part of the bigger, broader picture, because we are always going to need that no matter what. Yes, Menica.
I want to bring to your attention that especially in Texas, these are not choices. These are ectopic pregnancies. These are miscarriages that women are dying from in Texas because they cannot get the health care they need. So, I mean, you know, when you're talking it, I mean, I know what you're saying, but we just want to remember it's not all about making a choice. There are emergency medical situations that come up that women are dying from because of our law.
Yeah, thank you, Menica, for naming more explicitly sort of the types of situations, particularly of wanted pregnancies. If it's an ectopic pregnancy, or if there are fetal anomalies, or if there are other pre-existing conditions, there are lots of different things, which is why it's so important for these decisions to be between the pregnant person and their provider, and not the government, because we've known, especially in Texas, when they say all sorts of foolish things in committee hearings, and they prove that the legislators don't actually know about women's bodies and reproductive systems and the full complications of pregnancy. Like, are you really qualified to make this decision for me? I don't think so. Kylan, I'm seeing your thing in the chat. I was wondering what you hear Christians against abortion say about those situations. Do you have, I'm curious, Kylan, if you, how do they justify it? I am curious, actually, I'll throw this back to the group. Have y'all heard particular folks say things? I mean, some of the things that I have heard, and it's important, I want to sort of couch this of like, these are things that people say, but it's not, I would not advise other people to say these things, but that there is no justification for an abortion.
I was gonna say what they're saying. Since our work is in Alabama, the Bible Belt. We hear a lot of people say like it's God's will. That's what a lot of people are commenting, or God's plan, and that's their justification for not allowing abortion access.
Mhm.
So I think that's a interesting thing, because how can you really discern what is God's will? So
Yeah, I actually think this is a great question to get us into this discussion about what are Christian sources of authority and the ways that different types of Christianity operate, particularly for those of you in the Bible Belt, where even if you are not Christian, these are sort of the ideas and the ideologies and the logics behind some of these arguments that you're hearing. So I'm gonna go, really big, broad brushstrokes on a conservative Christian theological perspective and a more progressive theological perspective. These are like two poles that I'm painting. These are not, I would encourage you not to take these with a conservative, inerrant, literalist perspective of how I'm going to go through that, but there are general themes that can be really helpful in sort of unpacking and untangling what is happening when folks are talking about Christianity and abortion in particular, but Christianity and sex more broadly. So, a conservative understanding of Christianity emphasizes biblical inerrancy. So that is the book of the Bible, of which there are many books, it is inerrant. There are no errors in it. You must read it very literally, word for word, and what is there is what is meant. They really focus on the 10 Commandments as a source of authority, and if you are following those, then you are you are aligned. If you are not, then you are out of alignment. And they engage in a lot of proof texting. So if you see something like a whole paragraph and there are like citations of scripture all over the place, that might be a sign that is a more conservative Christian take. So taking verses out of context to make these bold universal claims. I'm actually going to start going back and forth, like one side to the other side, to sort of compare these. So going back up, biblical inerrancy and literalism. A progressive understanding of Christianity takes the Bible seriously, but not necessarily literally. So it might read the text in context and ask questions of, well, what was the historical context where this text was developed? Who were the particular people that were the original hearers of this word? Whereas a conservative understanding focuses on the 10 Commandments. More progressive understanding focuses on Jesus's commandment to love God, love neighbor, and love self. That is both in Matthew and draws upon and expands upon some of the 10 Commandments in the first 5 books of the Bible. Rather than proof texting, they study scripture in the context of that section, in that book, and sort of the Bible as a whole. And so what are the lessons that we can take as a whole, rather than what do these 3 words say, and that's everything. Conservative understanding closely follows the dogma, doctrine, and letter of the biblical law, and this is important. The goal is to be good enough to get into heaven. So again, if you break those 10 Commandments, you are out of alignment. You are not able to get into heaven. Heaven is like the ultimate goal. A more progressive understanding is to discern the right path for relationships, a focus on compassion, the spirit of the biblical law here on earth, and there's a space for individual moral agency. A conservative understanding is that the Bible is a guide for discipleship, and a goal is to save souls here on earth. So that's converting people to Christianity. More progressive understanding is that the Bible is a guide for us to treat other people. There's not this focus on saving souls or bringing people to Christ in that way. The role of leaders in a conservative setting is to direct, order, and control the lives of the religious adherents. On the progressive side, leaders are more providers of spiritual principles and practices that guide people along their own paths. And the sort of dominant idea of who God is in a conservative setting is that God is a judge. He was here to judge you and all of us between right and wrong, according to all these other things that are in this column. A more progressive understanding is that God is love. And if we read the Bible through that, if we can see God as a loving God in all of these settings, that will determine where we are, how we act, things like that. Again, very big, broad brushstrokes. So those are the key themes. And so now I want to be specific on things like abortion. So the Bible doesn't really say anything about abortion. And when it does, there is a passage in Exodus 21, 22 through 25. It's not really about abortion, but it is about a pregnancy loss. And there's a clear delineation of the pregnant person's life is seen as life for life, is valued as a full person. The loss of a pregnancy is determined by a money amount. So a pregnancy loss is not equal morally or ethically to the loss of a pregnant person. The other one is Numbers 5, 20 through 22, is a very complicated, it's not a great passage, I'll tell you that. It is telling of if there is a man who assumes or believes that his wife has committed adultery, he can bring her to the priest. The priest will make a potion. If she has committed adultery, it will induce a miscarriage. If she has not committed adultery, her fertility is fine and she is able to continue to be fertile, have future children, all of that. It's not great. These are not that's not a rah, yay, God loves women passage. But if you're trying to use the Bible to say God is against abortion, God is against sex at all times, it just doesn't say that. So what it does say, it prioritizes the health, life, and well-being of the pregnant person. And we can look back at the story of creation in the Christian tradition, that life is given at breath. And even when life is given at that breath, humans also have moral agency to make the decisions that are best for ourselves. Again, there's the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. So that encourages us to engage with compassion. I don't think that, I keep picking on Texas. This work started in Texas and I lived in Texas for a while, so I know them well. But the bounty laws and things that are in Texas of calling and snitching on your neighbor, that is not loving your neighbor. That is not acting out of compassion. When we want to talk about what are the beginnings and endings of life, there are no certainty. There's no agreement across religious traditions or across science and different scientific disciplines on what the beginning or the ending of life is. And so there's mystery in that, and we can say that God is in that, and we can hold people and walk them through whatever their experience is, both of the beginnings and of the endings of life. And we can hold the complexity of emotions that folks feel. When it comes to sort of how to live these things out, we are theoretically still in a democracy. Theoretically, we still have separation of church and state, which means that my personal faith convictions should not have policy implications for the entire state. There are lots of Jewish folks who have been filing lawsuits against these abortion bans, especially the ones that literally call out Christian scripture, because they violate the religious freedom of Jews, of Hindus, of Muslims, of any non-Christian whose religious tradition does not, and even Christianity, does not legislate against abortion. Some more positive messaging ideas and ways to ground yourself is that we trust and respect women. Jesus trusts and respects women. Jesus listens to the woman at the well in John 4 and does not shame or judge her for her marital status, for her history of having multiple partners, for whatever reason. That Jesus trusts and respects women, and then she is the one who becomes the evangelist and tells the entire village about who Jesus is. And we can trust women's moral agency. God gives every single person a conscience, the ability to make moral and ethical decisions. Reproductive decisions should be free from shame, judgment, and stigma, and that God is with us throughout our whole lives, which includes our entire reproductive lives. So let's see what we have here. I'm going to leave this up because I know some of y'all are taking notes. But this is the end of my content piece. So I'd love to get some questions, some discussion going. What is resonating with you? Let me look back at the chat and see what else y'all have been saying while I've been talking.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed your speaking. So we have time for some questions. I'm going to link again. You'd like to take a brief survey about how much you guys enjoyed today's webinar. So I'm going to link it one more time so you have time to fill it out while we're going through questions. So that would be great. If you would please fill that out. It helps us in our organization get more information about what kind of things you want to hear about next month and going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Taryn. Holly, I see your question. Do you know if the 24% of women before age of 45 are medical and elective abortions? I assume so. Yes. I think it's just any abortion for any reason in any case. It is. This is it will impact 1 in 4. And so part of the way that we say that, again, particularly when congregational leaders were not talking about this, is to say that there are 1 in 4 women everywhere. Again, we talked all across racial lines, across economic lines, 1 in 4, which means 1 in 4 people in your congregation, in the pews every day. If you've got an older congregation, they probably had an abortion before. If you've got folks who are raising children now, they're probably having miscarriages and having abortions and making reproductive decisions every single day. And what the challenge is, if you do not show, and I don't know how many clergy there are on here, and I'll speak also to myself. If I do not show my willingness to hear someone's story without shame, judgment, or stigma, they will not share it with me. So just because you're not hearing them does not mean that they're not happening. And so that's part of what we do at Sacred, is to try and create and hold space and prepare congregations to receive the fullness of the stories that everyone is carrying. Barbara, thank you for your comment. Trust the woman and their reason, and that religion told you to stay with an abuser. Yeah, that's certainly a part of this. The ways that the patriarchal side of religion it can be really anti-woman and misogynistic and say, go along to get along, no matter what harm you're experiencing. I'm really sorry that happened to you. Menica.
Yeah, I've been trying to share my story more and more, but I had this was 23 years ago, but at 20 weeks, I found out that our baby had a fatal anomaly, and we terminated at 22 weeks, and it was legal back then in Texas. But I was a part of a chat group called A Heartbreaking Choice, and there were so many Catholics on that group, Catholic women mostly, who said that they would have never considered having an abortion until they were put in the situation where they found out their baby had a fatal anomaly, and just thought that that was the best decision that they needed to make for their baby and for their family and for themselves. So that was, just, you can have these convictions, but when you're placed in situations, you just never know. You do what's best or what needs to be done.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you for sharing your story. I'm sorry for that loss. And that's, for religious leaders to pile on shame and all sorts of negativity onto a situation like that is already really hard for parents to make those decisions. And that's part of what I would say the responsibility is for religious communities. Yes, there's the statistic I don't remember the exact percentage, but the most common feeling that people who have had abortions name is relief. And it is not the only one. And religious spaces are places where we should be able to hold those complex feelings and to walk with folks through whatever it is that they're feeling without putting on our own angst or judgment or fear or whatever, but to just be with compassion and walk with folks. So that is part of what we work on with congregations. We have a sacred curriculum for small groups. And I think, Menica, is your church, have y'all started it yet? You're about to start it?
We're doing it in the spring.
Yes. Okay. So Horizons UU, if you're in Carrollton, Texas, go hang out with Menica and do the sacred curriculum in the spring. But it helps folks to walk through all of those different kinds of scenarios and prepare themselves, and do their own work with their own stories that we're carrying. Subramaniam, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Please correct me. Okay, great. Subramaniam. You mentioned that Catholic Church doesn't support abortion, but Catholics do. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, I think Menica started to point at that, that I would say the Catholic Church is one that is particularly hierarchical, and there are the particular institutions, and the people who identify in that particular tradition recognize that life can be more complicated than dogma, that life can be more complicated than the institution. There are plenty of Catholics who love their queer children. There are plenty of queer Catholics who are still a part of that, but are like, I'm still going to be true to myself. And in Catholicism, there's also the primacy of conscience as one of their doctrines. We have partners at Catholics for Choice. That's a really great organization if you want to learn more about that in particular. So there is still the primacy of conscience, which means that God still trusts your conscience. Each individual person still has a conscience and can make particular moral decisions, and this sort of understanding that God can understand where you are in your particular situation that might be different than what the institutional church has laid out in their own dogma and in their own theological statements. And it's sort of the question of, from a more academic perspective, like sociology of religion, of, okay, the institution says a thing, how much does that impact the people on the ground who are actually practicing it? That there can be wide gaps. But Catholics are, white Catholics, Latinx Catholics are far more permissive than the institution. Yes, Paige.
I just wanted to say thank you first for reminding me of those dates, which kind of like floated away. That's important when you're talking to somebody to remember this is not something that's been around forever. The other thing that I wanted to just make a comment on was that I think that Christians need to take back Christianity, just like people are talking about taking back the word patriotism. I find myself in conversations of people who are Christian this, Christian that, saying not all Christians, just a very small part of Christianity is that narrow-minded. And I think it's important to fight that way, because, or to protect Christianity from this demonizing.
Yes, thank you, Paige. I want to go back to this slide. Nope, this one. That a reminder that you have all that you need to participate in this conversation. You don't need to have gone to seminary. You don't need a fancy degree. You don't need a title. You don't need to be ordained in order to have a really valid opinion and to have a valid viewpoint from rooted in your own spirituality and in your own story. We like to say that we're weaving together our faith and reproductive story free from shame, judgment, and stigma. And that means your faith story, even if you're not a part of a religious tradition or you never have been. We live in a country that is dominated by the hegemony of white Christianity. So what is your story rebelling against that? That it's all in the water and the air, the water we breathe, what water we swim in, the air that we breathe, mixing all my metaphors. So we have some sort of a story, even if we're not a particular religious adherent. In the same way, you all have a reproductive story. Even if you have never given birth, even if you are not parents, you have your own, starting with your birth. You were born at a particular time in a particular place to a particular people, and that is a part of your reproductive story, and you're making those decisions all across your lifespan. And there is a particular message in the world that says these things have to be totally separate, unless you are willing to abide by this one very narrow particular view. And we're trying to say, no, you can weave those together, and that the divine is in and with you through all of those decisions, all of your experiences, however joy-filled or awful they are, and that you're carrying them. And we just want to make more space for the courageous conversations about those stories. Yes, Kathy.
I was just going to say that when I started paying attention to this focus on religious people and their support of reproductive justice, I heard somewhere, I think it was you minister, who talked about needing to take back what's moral. And that really nailed it for me. Like that the right has determined what's moral, and that having reproductive freedom is actually what I believe is moral, so yeah, that's what I think about when I think about this issue.
So
Ooh,
I'm going to
what's that?
pull up our yard signs. You can
Yay.
that say abortion access is a moral and social good.
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy, for that. I'm going to move to some next steps as we are winding down our time. And so I invite you, as a way to take away from this, I invite you to tell someone a part of your faith and repro story. I invite you to start practicing, maybe with a trusted friend or colleague, maybe with someone in your religious community, maybe a neighbor. I invite you to tell part of that story, because that's how we start to change the culture. If you want to stay connected with Sacred, we are on social media. This is an old presentation because it says we're on Twitter. I mean, we have a Twitter. We're not tweeting. We're at @sacred_repro on Instagram and at Sacred Repro on Facebook. If you want to get onto our email list, you can go to sacreddignity.org, and you can find all sorts of things, including the yard signs. I'll put a particular link to that. And if you are interested in these kinds of conversations, we have a fall webinar series called Woven Together that is going to be all sorts of faith and religion and spirituality and Bible and abortion and reproductive justice and white Christian nationalism and cross movement things. We have 6 sessions. So if you want to register for those, it's our political education series that starts in 2 weeks from today, to keep having these conversations and learning a little bit more about what this religiously rooted movement is up to and how folks are showing up for that today. And that, I think, is all that I have.
Yes, thank you so much. Everybody's really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed hearing you speak today. If you'd like to know more about the Alabama campaign for adolescent sexual health, you can visit our website, which is alabamacampaign.org. You can check us out on social media. Our Instagram is AL Teen Health. We will be having our next webinar next month on October. Let me check my calendar real quick. On October 8th at the same time, we will be having a speaker come speak on, so I have a little bit of she will be speaking on reproductive health as well, but also talking about her journey from her journey into doing more sacred work revolving her being away from even growing away from the evangelical circle into finding her faith in a different way. She's over paperback and fry bread, so that will be really exciting. So please fill out the survey if you would like to keep connected with us at the Alabama Campaign, and we're so grateful that you're here. So everyone else, any final questions or anything before we log off for today? It would be great before we hang up. Oh, also this website, if you missed it or would like to, this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. If you missed anything and want to go watch it, we will have that available to you probably in the next couple hours or so. If you'd like to share with anybody, we will have that ready for you.
Thank you, everyone. It was
All
a
right.
delight to be with y'all today.
All right, thank you. Oh, the YouTube channel is the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. I can link it let me link it for you actually, since so you can have it. I can link it really fast if you need it. Here is the link to the YouTube channel, so you can have when the video is uploaded, you can check it out. So thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Thank
I won't
you.
hang up just quite yet in case anyone's trying to click the links. It won't be gone, so.